Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
They sent photos in the family group chat that morning, all sun and smiles and matching linen outfits, the kind of carefully staged happiness that looks even faker when you know the backstory. Mom wore a wide-brimmed hat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Chloe was already holding a drink with a paper umbrella, and Dad had that forced grin that says, "I'm trying to look relaxed because my wife told me to." The caption underneath the photo said, "Finally, the whole family together." Except, of course, I was sitting at home, in the same kitchen I grew up in, watching the sunlight come through the same crack in the blinds, and realizing I had officially become the ghost of my own family portrait. They told me I couldn't come because I needed to focus on school. Which would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic, considering I'd graduated nearly a decade ago. I laughed at first, waiting for someone to admit it was a joke, maybe a poor attempt at humor, but no, Mom said it with the same cold tone she used whenever she wanted to make something final. "You have your own responsibilities, Emily. You can't just drop everything and go to the beach." As if I was the one who ever got to drop anything. Chloe, of course, chimed in, saying something like, "It's probably for the best. You hate crowds anyway." That was the moment I realized they weren't being thoughtless, they were being deliberate. Exclusion disguised as logic, cruelty disguised as care. It's strange how you can live your whole life in a house and not see it until everyone leaves. The silence that week felt heavy, like the walls themselves were trying to apologize. I made coffee in the same chipped mug I used as a teenager, the one with the fading Disney logo, and looked around at all the framed pictures on the walls. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays. My family laughing in every single one. My face always on the edge, blurred, blinking, or conveniently cropped. I'd always thought it was bad luck, but looking at it now, it felt more like intention. Like even the camera had learned to forget me. When I was younger, I used to tell myself that being left out meant I was different, maybe even special. But standing in that kitchen, surrounded by reminders of people who'd built their happiness around my absence, I stopped making excuses. I started remembering. My 16th birthday, when they forgot the cake because Chloe had a recital. My college graduation, where Mom complained about the weather more than she congratulated me. Even last Thanksgiving, when Dad raised a toast to our amazing daughters, then looked directly at Chloe as if I were a neighbor borrowing sugar, not his child. That night, as they were probably eating shrimp cocktails by the ocean, I scrolled through the group chat again, maybe hoping for an apology, or at least a mention. Instead, I found something else. Chloe had posted another photo, Mom with her arms around her, Dad holding up his drink. The caption said, "No dead weight this time." My thumb froze on the screen. I stared at those words until they blurred into the background of her smiling face. It wasn't even subtle. It was cruel, careless, and honest in the way people are when they think the person they're talking about will never see it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, not right away. What I felt was something quieter, like a door finally clicking shut inside my chest. I put my phone face down on the counter and just sat there. Outside, it started to rain, and the steady sound against the window almost felt like company. I remember thinking, if they wanted a life without me, maybe I should finally give them one. But not in the way they expected. I started small. That night, I backed up every family photo from my computer to a private drive. Every trip, every dinner, every fake smile. I organized them neatly, one folder per year, labeling each with the same word, proof. I didn't know exactly what I was planning yet, but the idea of holding all those memories, the ones they thought belonged only to them, gave me a strange sense of control. I went into the group chat and quietly removed myself. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. The little gray text appeared. Emily left the group. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how long it would take before they noticed. The next morning, Mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail about how dramatic I was being, how she didn't mean anything by it, how I should grow thicker skin. I replayed it twice, then deleted it. For the first time, I felt no guilt. Just space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to exist without being compared to the golden child tanning herself on a private beach. I spent the rest of that week doing something I hadn't done in years, living like the house was mine. I cooked messy dinners, left dishes in the sink, opened every window just because I could. The air smelled like freedom and old dust. I even laughed when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, wearing Dad's old t-shirt and holding a paint roller like a weapon. For once, I wasn't invisible to myself. But late one night, I went to the closet and pulled out the family photo albums Mom kept in those fake leather binders. I flipped through the pages slowly, page after page of smiling faces, birthday candles, vacations, and celebrations that all felt like they belonged to someone else. I ran my fingers over the photos, feeling the thin plastic sleeves crackle beneath my skin. There I was, half cut off again, always near the edge. It hit me then. My family had been erasing me long before I ever thought of disappearing. I closed the album and whispered to the empty room, "Fine. Let's see how it feels when the ghost finally walks out." The idea settled somewhere deep in my chest, dangerous but steady, like a seed taking root. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification, another picture from the beach. Chloe in a hammock, holding her drink toward the camera, her smile wide and hollow. I stared at it, then quietly opened my laptop and renamed my private photo folder. The new title glowed on the screen, Phase 1. That night, as the storm rolled in outside, I lay awake listening to the rain and realized something I should have understood years ago. Sometimes, to make people see what they've done, you have to show them what it looks like when you're truly gone. The first morning without their noise arrived like a long exhale I did not know my body had been holding, and as the sun pushed a pale stripe across the hallway carpet, I walked the rooms with a mug that had gone cold. Noticing how the house changed personality the second the performance left town, how the framed smiles looked flat under real light, how the scented candles that Mom loved smelled less like coastal breeze and more like someone trying to hide something they did not have the courage to clean. I moved slowly, not because I was sentimental but because I wanted to catalog the stage I had been assigned since childhood, the kitchen where I learned to speak softly so I would not crowd the conversations about Chloe, the living room where holiday toasts angled toward the favorite like sunflowers following a single warm star, the hallway where my pictures were present in the technical sense yet edited by angle and shadow until I might as well have been an extra in a commercial for a family I did not recognize. Their rooms were left open in the lazy confidence of people who believe the world will hold their place while they step out for lobster rolls and sunset selfies. And I stood in the doorway of my sister's room absorbing the museum of curated chaos that was her personality made into furniture. A rack of dresses still tagged, a ring light staring at the bed like a small white moon, a vanity scattered with perfume vials that all promised different versions of the same fantasy, and on the wall a grid of photos clipped to twine, the kind of installation a lifestyle blog would call effortless, except that in frame after frame I was either a shoulder near the edge or a sudden absence that made the composition cleaner. I kept my hands in my pockets because I know myself and I knew if I touched anything I might start rearranging the whole timeline, which, as it turned out, was exactly what I would do later. Only on my terms and with more intention than anyone in this house had ever shown me. Back in the living room, I pulled the big album from the bottom shelf, the one with the fake leather that always stuck in summer, and I set it on the coffee table like an artifact. Then I opened to a random year and felt that familiar punch of recognition mixed with bafflement, because there we were at a theme park, Mom radiant in a visor, Dad pretending he liked roller coasters, Chloe mid-laugh with whipped cream on her nose, and me a fraction of a face peeking from the margin like a witness who wandered into the shot. I turned the page and the pattern continued, and by the fifth spread I had stopped telling myself stories about bad angles and started admitting the truth that lived underneath the gloss, which was that my family had been practicing a casual art of erasure long before they booked a beach suite without me. I made lunch from whatever was left in the fridge, which turned into a salad that tasted like obligation, and as I ate standing over the sink I stared at the row of silver frames on the windowsill and felt a small, decisive click in my chest. The kind that says you are done negotiating with people who treat kindness like store credit, redeemable when convenient. I washed the plate, dried it, and then I took the first frame, popped the back with my thumbnail, slid out the photo, and replaced it with a postcard from a stack I kept in a drawer, a foggy lighthouse I bought during a road trip I took alone because no one could be bothered. I pressed the tabs shut and set the frame back down, and the effect was minor but strangely electric, as if I had performed a private magic trick where memory learned a new language. Once I started, I could not stop, because the rhythm soothed some raw place that had been chafed for years. Frame after frame, I substituted landscapes and vintage strangers and pictures of empty beaches where footprints erased themselves with every roll of water. And by the time the mantle was finished, the room felt like it had inhaled and decided to hold the breath until it turned into something stronger than air. I did not tear anything, I did not smash, I did not leave evidence that would let them play the victim. I simply altered the curation, a curator finally curating herself. And I tucked the displaced photos into a flat archival box I labeled with a word that made me smile despite myself, because there are days when a little gallows humor is the only road out. Inventory. In my room, I pulled suitcases from the closet with a level of calm that startled me, folding clothes not as a dramatic gesture, but as practical choreography, because while I had not announced it even to my own reflection, the plan had begun writing itself the moment I saw that caption about dead weight, and plans like that do not need speeches, they need lists. I made one on a notepad, long lines of ordinary actions that added up to a life pivot: close the bank account they monitor, open the account they do not, forward the mail to a box with a key only I hold, scan the documents that prove I exist to institutions that matter more than people who crop me from the edge, save the childhood keepsakes worth keeping. Hand off the rest to a thrift store that will not ask questions about why a grown woman is donating a stack of participation ribbons and a once-loved winter coat. The house felt different by late afternoon, both emptier and more mine, and as the sky moved from flat blue to a layered bruise, I sat at the dining table and scrolled through old emails, the kind you ignore until they become important. A thread from a freelance project last year that turned into a handful of late-night conversations with a man named Mark who had a knack for solving problems that began as feelings and ended as logistics. He once said, half joking, that if I ever needed to disappear, he could make the administrative parts less miserable. I never answered that line, partly because I did not trust my own temptation and partly because I believed I would never be brave enough to need it, but now my cursor hovered over his name the way a hand hovers above a fire, wanting warmth and fearing the burn. I closed the laptop because discipline sometimes looks like denial, turned off the lights because clarity sometimes needs darkness, and stood at the window watching the neighbor's porch light blink on. A small domestic heartbeat in a suburb that prides itself on predictability, and I wondered how much noise my absence would make in a family that specializes in pretending things are fine. The phone buzzed on the table with the jump of a nervous animal, and I almost let it go to whatever fate messages find when we ignore them, but I looked anyway, because curiosity is a muscle I have trained too well. And the text on the screen came from a number I did not recognize. A simple line delivered with the calm of someone who already knows the answer. Still interested in that position out west, the one we talked about, the one with a fresh start and no questions. I did not reply to the message right away because answering would turn an idea into a decision, and decisions carry an aftertaste that lingers even when you try to rinse your mouth with logic. Yet the screen waited with the kind of patience that feels like a dare. So I poured coffee I did not need, sat at the dining table where family arguments once hid under the tablecloth like crumbs, and typed a simple acknowledgement that said I remembered the conversation and that I might finally be the person who could use a clean door out. Then I watched the typing bubble appear with steady rhythm, as if the sender had been expecting my surrender for months. Mark did not waste words, which is a rare mercy in a world where people drown sincerity under soft blankets of cliches, and he laid out a series of steps that did not sound romantic or thrilling, but instead sounded like responsible adult chores. Because disappearing, at least the kind that does not end in chaos or headlines, is largely paperwork, timing, and the willingness to accept that not every goodbye earns a speech. We started with the small bones that hold a life together, those pleasant little entanglements that keep you reachable even when you feel forgotten. I opened a new email under a name that still felt like mine, but lacked the usual breadcrumbs. I switched 2 recurring bills to a prepaid card I funded in cash. I rented a small storage unit near a bus station not because I needed storage, but because a key and an address create a useful illusion when someone later wants to believe you are still inside a certain radius, and I forwarded a portion of my mail to a box where the clerk never asks why you need it as long as your check clears. Mark's tone stayed brisk and calm, like a pilot who has landed in storms and does not over-explain the turbulence, and he reminded me that emotion would try to sabotage me by turning every item into a keepsake. So I stood in my room breathing the air of old sweaters and school notes and made a brisk inventory that divided the past into 3 piles: what I would carry, what I would digitize, and what I would release without a ceremony, because sometimes respect for a memory looks like not embalming it. I worked my way through the house the way a museum conservator might reclaim misattributed art, separating my things from the shared collection, scanning documents that proved I had once been a daughter who filled out emergency contact forms in good faith, and labeling boxes with names that meant nothing to anyone but me, like Tuesday mornings or the winter with red boots, because meaning does not have to be universal to be powerful. Between tasks, I allowed myself small acts of petty justice that felt like a balm rather than a wound, the kind of playful revenge that does not leave bruises but does rearrange the narrative. And I started with the jungle of houseplants Mom adored and assigned me to water as proof that I remained useful in their absence. I photographed each leafy diva in flattering light, listed them on a neighborhood group with cheerful descriptions, collected cash at the curb from strangers who promised to love them, and laughed softly when I swept the last dry soil from the entryway, because nothing says independence like a tidy empty windowsill where there once stood a forest of obligations. Mark asked me to scrub the public versions of myself with discipline rather than drama, so I resisted the urge to post a manifesto and instead deactivated old accounts, removed tags where I was presented as the extra in someone else's story, and uploaded my favorite photos to a private archive that felt like a quiet chapel I could visit later when doubt pretended it was nostalgia. For the physical albums, I practiced a precise surgery that would make even the pettiest aunt proud, sliding my pictures out with a butter knife, leaving behind immaculate rectangles of sunlit birthdays and manicured holidays where the composition suddenly betrayed the missing angle. And as the stack of extracted images grew, I did not weep or rage. I simply breathed deeper, because taking myself back from a paper page felt like proof that a person can reclaim shape even after years of being squeezed to the margin. The logistics of money came next, because clean exits require fuel, and I did not intend to strand myself in some motel anecdote, so I closed the secondary account Mom once convinced me to share for family emergencies, opened a new one at a smaller bank with no sentimental footprint, and moved what little savings I had with the same decisiveness you use to pull a splinter before it gets infected. I sold 2 pieces of jewelry I never wore. I exchanged a storage trunk of designer hand-me-downs for cash at a consignment shop that smelled like expensive regret, and I created a bare-bones budget that looked stern but liberating, a promise to myself that survival would not require permission. When I finally allowed myself to think about goodbye, not the spoken kind, but the structural kind, I wrote a short note on a sticky pad with the same chirpy voice they used to exclude me, a neat line that said, "Gone studying," which felt like a private joke so dry it crackled. Then I taped it to the inside of my bedroom door where it would greet them at the exact moment they expected me to apologize for existing, as a matching flourish. I set a timer on my email to send a tidy folder to each of them on the evening of their return, a folder of receipts and screenshots that did not scream or accuse, but simply documented the little dishonesties they preferred to bury under glossy captions, and I titled the folder Family Pictures, because accuracy can be both honest and devastating without a single curse word. By the 3rd day, the house looked like a stage after the crew has rolled the backdrops away, and my suitcase stood upright by the couch with the quiet confidence of an object that knows its job, while my phone sat face down on the table until I turned it over and sent Mark a final confirmation with the date and hour we had agreed upon. An hour that would intersect with their touchdown and their ride home from the airport in such a way that the timing would feel less like coincidence and more like choreography. He replied with an address, a key code, and one line that made me smile despite the ache that kept trying to climb my throat, a line that said he would handle the noise if any came, and that my only task now was to walk through the door I had been building plank by plank. I locked the front door, leaned my forehead against the wood like you do when saying a quiet prayer you are not sure you believe, then I slipped the house key into an envelope addressed to myself at the new box, and slid it through the mail slot so that even the act of re-entry would demand intention rather than reflex, and I was halfway down the driveway, suitcase wheels humming, when my phone buzzed with a new notification from an unlisted address that contained a single attachment named guest_list.pdf, which I opened without meaning to and which displayed a tidy reservation for a beachfront suite with 4 names neatly typed, one of them mine, crossed out in thick permanent marker. They came back on a Sunday evening wrapped in the easy glow people wear when they have been coddled by concierge smiles and salted air, dragging glossy suitcases across the threshold with the triumphant clatter of tourists who believe home has patiently held its breath for them. And for a suspended moment the house did an admirable impression of its old obedient self until the first details began to announce themselves with the polite persistence of a doorbell that refuses to be ignored. Because the framed photos on the mantel now displayed horizons where faces used to be, the windowsills that once supported Mom's leafy kingdom stood clean and empty like ankles freed from ankle weights, and the air carried that demure hotel lobby neutrality that follows a deep clean and a goodbye. Mom's voice arrived first, high and bright, and a little winded as she asked why the living room looked staged, the kind of complaint that sounds like a question, but is really a grievance, while Dad answered, with silence disguised as diplomacy, a practiced shrug of a man who knows the weather will change if he waits long enough and nobody makes him name the cloud. Chloe, who never met a surface she did not inspect for something to reflect herself in, floated toward the mantel with a squint that could slice fruit, tapping the glass of a frame like she expected a genie to pop out and explain the landscape where her favorite selfie used to hang, then calling my name in that sugar-glazed tone people use with pets that have learned to ignore them. And when the house declined to produce me on cue, she reached for her phone, thumb moving fast, soundlessly, drafting the public version of confusion that would cast her as a concerned sister even as the caption's subtext rehearsed plausible deniability. In the kitchen, Mom discovered the neat absence of her plants with the theatrical gasp of a woman who has lost a small fortune rather than a collection of ferns, then pivoted with astonishing speed to accuse me of negligence for not watering them, a criticism that collided rather poorly with the cardboard coasters stacked precisely where the jungle once grew. Each coaster labeled with a name and a forwarding address, a breadcrumb trail of adoption letters that confirmed every leaf had found a new home, preferably one where living things were not used as proof that a daughter remained useful. The first wave of panic did not arrive like thunder so much as like static, buzzing at the edges while they tried to reset the narrative, and I imagined Dad rehearsing a line about me being sensitive, Mom previewing a speech about gratitude, Chloe drafting a text that positioned her as the worried one, yet their choreography fell out of step the instant the television blinked awake without anyone touching the remote, the screen politely presenting a slideshow of folders titled with months and years, each folder blooming into tidy grids of screenshots and scans, each grid documenting small untruths that never meant to stand trial, Dad's secret credit line dressed up as a work account, Mom's charitable expense adjustments that turned fundraising into personal shopping, Chloe's portfolio padded with images she borrowed from photographers who never consented to the borrowing, and as the evidence turned the room pale, the slideshow gently looped back to the index, landing on a final folder labeled Me, which, when opened by the same invisible hand, revealed a solitary file titled me.jpg that rendered as a clean white field, blank and humming, like snow that had learned to glow. My timed message arrived in their inboxes at the precise minute traffic reports claimed their flight had landed, which meant the alert chimed now with a collective ping that sounded like a choral refusal to be ignored. And the email did not rant or plead or poison the well with insults, because I had grown tired of supplying their favorite defense, calling me dramatic, and instead it offered a brisk inventory written in the calm grammar of a receipt. My accounts closed and reopened, my mail forwarded, my key returned to the box with my name on it, my belongings removed without damage, and the albums retained for preservation in their accurate, unedited form, accompanied by a single line that felt, in my mouth, like a measured smile held just long enough to become a boundary, a line that read, "Since you love family pictures, I thought you might appreciate a set that tells the truth." Dad murmured that there must be some mistake and reached for his phone to call the bank or the provider. Or the kind of professional men call when the story stops obeying them, while Mom insisted the slideshow was a hack even as she recognized the receipts by the edges she herself had trimmed, and Chloe, who understood optics better than morality, deleted the drafted post she had not yet published and replaced it with a message to me that tried on 3 outfits in one paragraph: concern, anger, sisterly appeal, before deciding to leave it unsent. I had not booby-trapped the house, I had not smashed or slashed or scrawled a manifesto, because I wanted the absence to speak with the clarity of a courtroom oath. And as they opened doors that swung onto rooms relieved of obligation, they found only the residue of a person who had stopped begging to be seen. My room carried the soft vacancy of a hotel after checkout, mattress dressed in fresh sheets as a courtesy to the future, closet holding only a hanger like a thin rib, desk cleared except for the single sticky note on the inside of the door that offered the line about going to study, a wink so dry it could cut paper, and while Mom scoffed, Dad swallowed, because the joke had the flavor of a history he pretended not to know. When they finally asked one another where I had gone, the question did not mean geography, it meant jurisdiction, because for the first time the conversation did not belong to them, and when they tried my cell it rang exactly once before a bland voice announced the number had been reassigned, after which the silence felt less like a pause and more like a verdict. The last part of my small theater of justice unfolded not in their hands, but on their calendar, which chimed a second alert for an appointment I had scheduled under Mom's account back when she made the mistake of letting me help organize her digital life. And the event title rose on the screen with bureaucratic politeness: Family Drive. Final sync, nudging them toward the shared cloud where they discovered every album still technically present, only reordered by date and tagged accurately, so that recurring holidays revealed their absent center, birthdays demonstrated who got candles and who got excuses, and the metadata proved that the cropping had not been an accident. A rational person might have sat down then and drafted an apology. But rationality has never been our family's house wine, and I suppose that is why, when Mom finally inhaled for a speech, the power flickered, the television buzzed, and the slideshow returned to its beginning, exhaustive and patient, while my final scheduled email, set to send at the exact minute their rideshare receipt hit their accounts, landed with a single-line postscript beneath my signature that read, "If you want to know where I went, ask what you erased," followed by a short, untraceable link that opened to a live map shaped like the coast yet refusing to settle on a single pin, the path drawing itself and then vanishing like a tide line that dares you to follow before the water returns. I chose a town where the ocean does not perform for people with phones, but works the shoreline like an old Union shift, steady and a little grumpy. And I rented a small upstairs apartment over a bakery that wakes before dawn and makes the streets smell like warm sugar and second chances. And in that space with its uneven floors and stubborn windows, I practiced the grammar of a new life until it formed complete sentences, which meant I learned the rhythm of grocery days and laundry nights I took the long way home past porches where older couples argued kindly about which baseball team was worth their loyalty, and I let the quiet show me who I was when I was not auditioning for a role nobody ever meant to cast me in. Mark checked in twice with the neutrality of a person who has seen plans fail because the heart insisted on one more look back, and each time I thanked him with the kind of sincerity that does not turn into debt. Then I turned off my phone and pressed my forehead to the cool window glass and listened to the tide argue with the rocks in a language that does not require witnesses to be true. Work arrived in the way work often arrives for women who know how to hold three problems without dropping any, which is to say a cafe owner needed books moved, a local gallery needed someone who could count without lying, and a realtor needed a person to stage houses so they felt like lives rather than furniture. So I took the gigs that made the days feel honest and the nights feel earned. And I found a small treasure in the thrift store on Maple Street where every object is a survivor with a price tag, a cardboard box of mismatched picture frames that had lost their rightful occupants, and I cleaned them with vinegar, scraped the stubborn tape from the corners, and lined them along a slim shelf as if they were an orchestra waiting for a conductor who would never arrive. People who visited few at first and always met downstairs rather than upstairs, a boundary that felt like a spine, admired the frames and asked where the pictures were, and I said that sometimes absence does not mean emptiness, it means space being kept on purpose, and if they looked baffled, I offered coffee and changed the subject to the weather, because the weather forgives us for not telling it everything. On the morning that would later collect its own mythology, I woke to the bakery radio grumbling through static about a body found near a state beach 2 towns south. A Jane Doe with no wallet and no phone and no identifying marks except a small scar near the shoulder. And I felt my stomach lurch the way a boat lurches when a wave misbehaves, not because I believed the story belonged to me, but because the phrase Jane Doe is designed to vacuum seal grief so it can be stacked, and for a moment I imagined my mother setting the table and placing an extra plate because she prefers symbols to conversations, and my father filling his gas tank and choosing a direction because choosing a direction counts as effort, and Chloe opening her front-facing camera to practice an expression that would collect sympathy without requiring confession. I made tea, not because tea fixes anything but because the kettle demands action and action can outrun panic if you let it, and I stood at the window watching the gulls perform their lifelong argument over territory while I measured what the news had really taken from me, which was not safety, but the right to define my narrative without interruption. By early afternoon, a padded envelope arrived at the post office box with no return address and the practical handwriting of a person who practices discretion as a craft, and inside I found a thumb drive and a single printed line that said, "If anyone ever asks, tell them I am fine," which was the sentence I had scheduled for Mark to receive in the event that a certain set of contingencies aligned. Yet I had not sent him a trigger, and I had not asked for reassurance, so either the system ran itself like a polite machine, or he had decided to move the chess piece for me, and I will admit I stood there longer than necessary. Because sometimes kindness arrives wearing the same coat as control, and you have to decide whether to say thank you or mind your own boundaries. I did both. I took the drive home, slid it into the laptop that holds nothing sentimental, and watched as a series of still images flowed across the screen one by one with the patience of a priest turning pages, every single photo taken from the albums I rescued and then edited, each moment preserved, my figure neatly excised, the background healed so cleanly you would never guess anything had been there, and at the end a white field appeared, humming slightly the way fluorescent lights hum when the room is otherwise quiet, and the file name at the top edge read me.jpg in ordinary lowercase, which made the ordinary feel like an accusation and a relief at the same time. Revenge, when it is honest rather than theatrical, does not walk into a room drum-rolling its arrival. It arrives like a mirror that reflects in daylight what people swore looked different after sunset. And so I forwarded a single link to my family using the modest stopgap address I keep for emergencies, a link to a tidy cloud labeled Family Archive that contained everything the slideshow at home had revealed and a few things it had not, but now arranged with metadata that told a story without editorial commentary, because nothing punctures denial like the spreadsheet of your own choices, and under the link I wrote one sentence without warmth or cruelty, only finality, a sentence that read, "You have everything you asked for. The version of our life without me." I did not request a reply, and when the messages began to arrive anyway, they came in the voices I already knew by heart, Mom outraged, then conciliatory, then offended by my lack of gratitude for her attempt at reconciliation, Dad asking me to call him because calls are easier to erase than text, Chloe sending a photo of the blank frame on the mantel as if the absence were my failure rather than their art. So I let them stack in the inbox like unclaimed packages, and I walked to the shore where the wind wears the day thin, and I told the water that some people will choose mystery over accountability forever, and that my job was not to teach them otherwise. That night, because superstition sometimes masquerades as self-care, I printed a single photograph and slid it into one of the thrifted frames, a small coastal scene I had taken myself on a day when the sky forgot to be dramatic, nothing epic or tragic. Just tied in sand and a gull who could not decide whether to trust me, and I set the frame on the shelf among its empty neighbors, not as a signature but as an experiment, to see whether presents could share space with deliberate blankness. Without starting a fight. Before bed, I opened the news on my phone and read that the Jane Doe had been identified and that she had a family who had spent years trying to find her and who would now have a place to send flowers, and it did not feel like my salvation or my omen. It felt like a reminder that lives do not disappear only one way, and I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark listening to the bakery trays clatter downstairs as tomorrow assembled itself. When I finally slept, I dreamed I walked into my parents' house and every frame held a white square glowing faintly in the dusk, and somewhere in the next room a camera clicked without a hand to hold it, steady and tireless, recording the moment a family met the picture they had always requested. While far away, a notebook on my nightstand filled itself line by line with sentences I did not remember writing, sentences that said I was not gone, that I was not erased, that I had simply chosen to live where evidence does not require permission.